Azaadi, Freedom, Fascism, Fiction, a book by Arundhati Roy. Introduction. While we were discussing the title of this book, my publisher in the United Kingdom, Simon Prosser, asked me what I thought of when I thought of Azadi. I surprised myself by answering, without a moment's hesitation, a novel. Because a novel gives a writer the freedom to be as complicated as she wants, to move through worlds, languages, and time, through societies, communities, and politics. A novel can be endlessly complicated, layered, but that is not the same as being loose, baggy, or random. A novel to me is freedom with responsibility, real, unfettered azadi, freedom. Some of the essays in this volume have been written through the eyes of a novelist and the universe of her novels. Some of them are about how fiction joins the world and becomes the world. All were written between 2018 and 2020, 2 years that in India have felt like 200. In this time, as the COVID 19 pandemic burns through us, our world is passing through a portal. We have journeyed to a place from which it looks unlikely that we can return, at least not without some kind of serious rupture from the past, social, political, economic, and ideological. The last essay in this collection is about that. Coronavirus has brought with it another more terrible understanding of Azadi, the free virus that has made nonsense of international border, incarcerated whole populations, and brought the modern world to a halt like nothing else ever could. It casts a different light on the lives we have lived so far. It forces us to a question the values we have built modern societies on, what we have chosen to worship and what to cast aside. As we pass through this portal into another kind of world, we will have to ask ourselves what we want to take with us and what we will leave behind. We may not always have a choice, but not thinking about it will not be an option. And in order to think about it, we need an even deeper understanding of the world gone by, of the devastation we have caused to our planet, and the deep injustice between fellow human beings that we have come to accept. Hopefully, these essays, all but one written before the pandemic came upon us, will go some small way towards helping us negotiate the rupture. If nothing else, they are a moment in history recorded while waiting on a metaphorical runway before the aircraft we are all in took off for an as yet unknown destination, a matter of academic interest for future historians. The first essay is the W.G. Sabal Lecture on Literary Translation, which I delivered at the British Library in London in June 2018. Much of it is about how the messy partitioning of the language we knew as Hindustani into two separate languages with two separate scripts, now sadly and somewhat arbitrarily called Hindi and Urdu, in which, erroneously, Hindi is associated with Hindus and Urdu with Muslims, presaged the current project of Hindu nationalism by more than a century. Many of us hoped that 2018 would be the last year of the reign of Narendra Modi and his Hindu nationalist party. The early essays in this collection reflect that hope. As the 2019 general election approached, polls showed Modi and his party's popularity dropping dramatically. We knew this was a dangerous moment. Many of us anticipated a false flag attack or even a war that would be sure to change the mood of the country. One of the essays, Election Season in a Dangerous Democracy, 3 September 2018, is among other things about this fear. We held our collective breath. In February 2019, weeks before the general election, the attack came. A suicide bomber blew himself up in the Kashmir, killing 40 security personnel. False flag or not, the timing was perfect. Modi and the Bharatiya Janata Party swept back to power. And now, only a year into the BJP's second term, through a series of moves that this book deals with, India has changed beyond recognition. The secular, inclusive republic envisaged in the constitution imperfectly realized, but one that many of us dreamt of and haven't entirely given up on, as this book makes obvious, is being threatened at its very foundations. The infrastructure of fascism is staring us in the face. The pandemic is speeding up that process in unimaginable ways, and yet we hesitate to call it by its name. I started to write this introduction while the US President Donald Trump and his family were on an official visit to India in the last week of February 2020. So it too has had to pass through the rupture, the pandemic portal. The first case of COVID 19 in India has been reported on 30th January. Nobody, least of all the government, paid any attention. It had been more than 200 days since the state of Jammu and Kashmir had been stripped of its special status and placed under an information siege, and more than 2 months since a new anti Muslim citizenship law, widely seen as being unconstitutional, had brought millions of protesters onto the streets of India. In a public speech to a crowd wearing Modi and Trump masks, Donald Trump informed Indians that they play cricket, celebrate Diwali, and make Bollywood movies. We were grateful to learn that about ourselves. Between the lines, he sold us MH-60 helicopters worth $3 billion. Rarely has India publicly humiliated herself thus. Not far from the grand presidential suite of the Delhi hotel where Trump spent the night, and Hyderabad house where he held trade talks with Modi, Delhi was burning. In the northeast of the city, Muslims from working class neighborhoods were under attack. Violence had been in the air for a while, with politicians delivering open threats to Muslim women conducting peaceful sit in protests against the new citizenship law. When the attack began, Muslims fought back. Houses, shops, vehicles were burned. Many, including a policeman, were killed. Many more were hospitalized with gunshot wounds. Horrifying videos flew around the internet. In one of them, grievously wounded young Muslim men laid out on the street, some piled against each other by uniformed policemen, are being forced to sing the national anthem. Subsequently, one of them, Faizan, died. The Huffington Post carried a chilling report of how he had been tortured and had a policeman's baton pushed down his throat. Trump made no comment on the horror swirling around him. Instead, he conferred on Narendra Modi the title Father of the Nation. Until recently, this was Gandhi's title. I am no fan of Gandhi, but surely even he did not deserve this. After Trump left, the violence went on for days. More than 50 people lost their lives. About 300 were admitted into hospital with terrible wounds. Thousands of people moved into refugee camps. In Parliament, the Home Minister praised himself and the police. Other politicians made speeches cheered by their smirking supporters in which they more or less blamed Muslims for provoking their violence, for attacking themselves, burning their shops and hopes, and throwing their own bodies into the open sewage canals that crisscrossed their neighborhood. Every effort was made by the mainstream media to portray the violence as a Hindu Muslim riot. I wouldn't call it a riot. I would say it was an attempted pogrom against Muslim led by an armed fascist mob. And while the dead bodies were still surfacing in the field, Indian government officials held their first meeting about the virus. When Modi announced the nationwide lockdown on 24th March, India spilled out a terrible secret for all the world to see. What lies ahead? Reimagining the world. Only that.